scripture is in 1 Kings chapter 19. And we've been camped there looking at the story of Elijah. Not the exciting story of Elijah, but when Elijah got stuck. And he got stuck in a cave because of some bad choices, listening to the wrong voices, doing the wrong things. And God says, it's enough. You need to get unstuck. And we're going to continue that series this week and next week. And then we're going to celebrate Easter and look at what God's doing as we look at the ultimate breakout when Jesus broke out of the tomb and defeated death and sin in one fatal blow. And that was the ultimate example of being unstuck when Jesus did that. But before we get there, we have to go through 2 more steps of being unstuck. And today we're looking at facing unfinished business. Facing unfinished business. And as I was thinking about that, I remembered a story of a gentleman who was in the Pacific, and he was flying a little plane. He was a pilot. He was the only one on the plane. And he had mechanical problems, and his plane went down, but it went down close enough to one of the little Pacific islands that he could get to it, but it was a deserted Pacific island. He was the only person on it. And he didn't know how to get any message to anyone. He did know that they had his flight plan, but did he even show up on the radar? Because he was flying pretty low, and so he didn't know if he was going to even show up. And so he decided he needed to prepare for long-term survival. And he was actually on the island for about a decade before anyone found him. And it was kind of interesting when they found him. They said, we realized as we were looking at satellite pictures of the Pacific Islands that one island that a few years ago had no buildings all of a sudden had this little grouping of buildings. And it caught our attention because in the history of this area, no one had ever lived on that island. So we came and checked it out, and sure enough, there were little buildings all over the island. And when we got there, there was a survivor. And as the rescuers got off the boat, they were amazed because as they looked at all these little buildings from one side to the other surrounding this little beach, they realized that all the buildings except one were churches. And they just scratched their head. Why are there a bunch of churches here? And as the survivor came forward, they asked, hey, do you live in these churches? What's the deal here? No. Let me explain to you. When I first crashed and got to this island, I knew that I needed a place to worship God. So I built the church. And see that little church way over there? That's the first one I built. And they walked down to it and they looked, yeah, it's just a little church. But he wanted a place to worship. And they go, okay, yes, so you built that one, but what's this next one? It's a little bit bigger than the first one. He goes, well, after about 1.5 years, I got offended at that church. And I said, I'm never going to go back. And so I came out and I built this church. Remember, he's the only one on the island. And then about 1.5 years later, he got offended at that church. And so he built another church. And it kept going on. And this happened until he was rescued. And he goes, now look at this one. Isn't this the biggest, most beautiful church on the whole island? And the rescuers are going, okay, he lost his marbles. Are you saying that you, being the only person in the church, got offended at all these churches and you never looked back, you never went back, you just built a new church? Yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying. Now, we kind of chuckle at that, but that idea plays out so often in life today. Whether it's churches, whether it's groups we've been a part of, whether it's groups of friends we've been a part of, or actual official organizations, we get offended, we walk out and we say, we're never going back because they did something that makes me unhappy. And we never look back, but instead of dealing with the thing that offended us, we take the problem with us. Because the problem usually isn't in the building, like with this guy who was stranded on a deserted island. There was no problem in any of the buildings he had built. He was the problem. And so whenever he went, he took the problem with him wherever he went. And that's the truth about life today. There's a lot of people, I've met a lot of people who they find out I'm the pastor at First Baptist Church and they go, oh, I went to that church 20-some years ago. I'm like, wow, that's great. Where are you going to church now? I'm not going to any church now. Why not? Well, someone said something to me when I was attending that church and it offended me and I'm never going back. You never going back to our church? No, I'm never going back to any church. You're never going back to any church because someone said something 20 years ago that offended you, and you walked out and said, I'm never looking back, I'm never going back, and so you've carried this problem with you the entire time. Well, yeah. I've run into parents when we were leading the youth group, and we had kids start coming, and their youth group was growing, and it was great. We had about 30 kids coming. I remember when this one young lady started coming, and she was excited. She brought her friend, and after 2 weeks, her friend's mom showed up. Because she heard about what was going on. She wanted to see, and can I hang out and watch? I said, yeah, you can hang out and watch. And about halfway through youth group, I saw her whole demeanor change. She was excited, but then she started getting frustrated. I'm like, what's going on? And finally, when it came time to end, she was heading for the door, and I met her. I said, what's going on? And she goes, well, you see that girl who came in late? I said, yeah. Her mother and I, we don't get along. And if she's coming here, then my daughter's not going to come here, and I'm not coming back. I said, what on earth happened? She goes, when I was in junior high, this lady is as old as I am. When I was in junior high, she said something that offended me, and I've never talked to her since. So if she's here and her daughter's here, we're not coming back here. Okay, this is a real-life example of the illustration of the guy on the deserted island, and it happened here at this church. I'm not coming back because in junior high, when we weren't even going to church, this person said something, and they're sitting in this building, and I don't like it. We need to learn to deal with unfinished business. Because if we don't, we can't step into what God has for us. And that's what our text highlights today. If you have your Bibles, hopefully you're already to 1 Kings chapter 19. And I want to read, I'm not going to start at the very beginning when Elijah is running away. And he listens to the wrong voices. He leaves everyone, all his support system. He runs away. He gets to the desert. And it says that he got so tired and so frustrated that he decided he wanted to die. Talk about being in the low of lows. He wanted to die, and he laid down to die, and God sent an angel, woke him up, said, here's some food, eat it, refresh yourself. He ate the food. He fell back asleep. The angel came back, woke him up, said, okay, get up and continue on your journey. And he got up and he went on, and he ended up 200 miles away from where he was. And while he was there in a cave on Mount Horeb, or the mountain of God, God comes and talks to him. And I want to start in verse number 9. Because in verse number 9 it says, he's gotten to the mountain, and it says, there he went into a cave and spent the night. And the word of the Lord came to him, what are you doing here, Elijah? He replied, I've been very zealous for the Lord Almighty, and the Israelites have rejected your covenant, and torn down your altars, and put your prophets to death with the sword. And I'm the only one left, and now they are trying to kill me too. The Lord said, go out and stand on the mountain in the presence of the Lord, for the Lord is about to pass by. Then a great and powerful wind tore the mountain apart and shattered the rocks before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. After the wind there was an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake came fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire came a gentle whisper. When Elijah heard it, he pulled his cloak over his face and went out and stood at the mouth of the cave. The voice said to him, what are you doing here, Elijah? He replied, I've been very zealous for the Lord Almighty. The Israelites have rejected your covenant, torn down your altars, and put your prophets to death with the sword. And I'm the only one left, and now they are trying to kill me too. Verse 15. The Lord said to him, go back the way you came, go to the desert of Damascus. When you get there, anoint Hazael king over Aram. Also anoint Jehu, son of Nimshi, king over Israel, and anoint Elisha, son of Shaphat, from Abel Moliah, to succeed you as prophet. Jehu will put to death any who escape the sword of Hazael, and Elisha will put to death any who escape the sword of Jehu. Yet I reserve 7,000 in all Israel, all whose knees have not bowed down to Baal, and whose mouths have not kissed him. God met Elijah in the middle of being completely blocked. His ministry had come to an end in his mind. He wanted his life to come to an end. And God showed up in the middle of that self-deception. He had been repeating, and we talked about this, he not only had been listening to the wrong voices, and that's why he ran away, he not only isolated, and so the only thoughts that he had were his own thoughts, echoing in his own head, and he started listening, and so the lies he was telling himself became his truth. And we talked about that we can repeat lies long enough that they become a reality. And he says it twice to God. that I'm the only one. Israel is out to kill me. They've killed all the other prophets. And if you remember, the event that happened right before this was the victory that God did on Mount Carmel, where, yes, the people killed all the prophets, but they were all the false prophets of Baal and all the priests of Baal. It wasn't all the prophets of God. It was all the false prophets that had been killed. And he's saying, they killed all the prophets, now they're trying to kill me. The people of Israel weren't trying to kill him at all. Jezebel, the evil queen, said she wanted him dead. No one else said it. But he repeated the lies over and over again until he got to this point of being so depressed he just wanted to die. And he was in the desert of Damascus and he just wanted to die there. And God wouldn't let him die. And then God says, you're in the wrong place at the wrong time. And it's time that things change. It's a time that your life gets completely unblocked, but you have to do something. You have to face unfinished business. And that's not a pleasant thought for any of us to do, to face unfinished business. But the truth is, we can't step in to what God has for us until we deal with unfinished business. Or we're just taking that business, that problem, and it's compounded as we go into the new area, the new opportunity that God's given us. And so we need to learn to deal with unfinished business. And that's what we're looking at today, where God tells him, very point blank in verse 11, the Lord said, go out and stand on the rock. And then as he hears it, as he hears what Elijah is saying, he doesn't agree with him. He doesn't respond to him. But in verse 15, the Lord said to him, go back the way you came and go to the desert of Damascus. Go back the way you came. So often when we find ourselves stuck, we're looking for the next easiest route to get around the blockage. But when it comes to God, God says, you can't run from your problems. You have to go back the way you came. You have to deal with what is in the past, or you're always going to be carrying that around. There are people that I talk to on a regular basis who were hurt in their childhood growing up, and they've been carrying that hurt. And so now they view every person of a particular gender or a particular role in life through the lens of that hurt because they never dealt with that hurt. It could have been a father figure who was absent, so they don't know and trust any father figure. And so because of that, they don't trust anyone who is a man who has any kind of authority, and they've been hindered in their work environment. They've been hindered in relationships because they carry that hurt. Until they deal with that and let God take that blockage out, they will always be hindered, and that's the way they've lived their lives. There's others who, and we could go on through example after example, where when we don't deal with unfinished business, it prevents us from stepping into what God has for us. And so as we look at this, our very first thing we need to understand, our very first point is this: God calls us to face unfinished business head on. It's not a ignore it and it will go away situation. We have to deal with the reality of what is blocking us. We cannot ignore it. We have to address the issue, and we have to address it head on. You can't kind of go around it. And the first major action God told Elijah to do, the first major action, the first command that God told Elijah to do here was go back. Not go around to a different place. Go back the way you came. So often, people are looking for what God has next. And they go, I used to hear from God, and I remember when I just was passionate about him, and I kind of lost that, and I need to discover that, so maybe I need to go here, maybe I need to go there. And God says, no, go back to where you were serving me last. Go back to where you heard me last. Go back the way you came, deal with why you left, and then you can move on to what I have for you. If you remember from what I said, Elijah's ministry wasn't over at this point. There was another 6 years of raising up people. And during those 6 years, these prophets who hadn't bowed their knees, they came together, they joined together, they became school of prophets, where they were learning how to do ministry. And it's all because Elijah went back and dealt with what was unfinished business, but he had to go back the way he came. We need to remember what happened in the desert of Damascus. This is where he ran because the evil queen said, I don't like you. Okay, she actually said, I'm going to kill you, but she didn't really have any power or authority. All the people who were following her were dead because they were the false prophets and priests of Baal. She had really no power and authority. But she was mad and she vented, and he became afraid. To the point where he just wanted to die, and he had to go back through that same desert where he asked to die. And he had to deal with that situation. He had to deal with it. This represented the lowest part of Elijah's life as he spiraled down and down and down, where he had no food, he had no hope of going on, he was all alone. God showed up. God gave him food. God gave him the ability to go on, but he couldn't ignore it. He had to go back the way he had come. So many times we just want to move on. God unblocked the way so we can keep going the way we're going on. And God says, that's not where I ever called you to be. That's not anything I ever wanted you to do. You need to go back to where I wanted you. And to do that, you have to go back the way you came when you got to where you are. Had to face everything that had triggered this downward spiral. But we have to understand that we can't wait, and this is another thing we do, we try to wait for our circumstances to change or get better before we go back. God, let me hear that the evil queen is dead and then I'll go back. Okay, then you haven't dealt with the issue. You're ignoring the issue. You're just waiting for more favorable circumstances. No, we need to go back. And we need to obey now. And something we have to understand, God didn't tell him to go back by himself. God didn't say you're going to be on your own, because he always promised to be with him. And we have to understand that God says he will never leave us or forsake us. So if he's opening up the way, if he's unblocking things and he says go back, he's going with us. We're not alone. We might have to swallow a lot of pride. We might have to eat a lot of stuff we don't want to eat because we're dealing with the situation that got us off track. But we're not dealing with it by ourselves. We're going with God, and only God gives us some motive to go back the way we came. We have to understand that a fresh encounter with God doesn't change our circumstances, but it changes us so that we can face those circumstances. Elijah had the same circumstances there when he ran away. He had the same thoughts echoing in his head, but he had a fresh encounter with God himself. You see, when we encounter God, circumstances might not change, but we always change. We always change. And when we change and God asks us to do something, we need to obey right then and there, not wait until we think it's right. Because whenever God asks us to do something, that's when it's right. We need to be willing to obey and face those circumstances because God has brought about a change in us. But to do that, we need to understand our second point and deal with our second point, which is this. We need to overcome avoidance. We live in a society of avoidance. We've learned to develop a way to avoid and manipulate stuff so that it's never uncomfortable. So we've learned to manipulate light so that we can turn on lights and we can stay up and do what we want as long as we want, and we're able to see and do all that kind of stuff. We've learned to avoid the discomfort of darkness because there's lots of people who are uneasy in the dark. We've learned to take out pain of a lot of different situations. You go to anyone's house pretty much and open up their medicine cabinet, and you're going to see dozens of medications to help avoid pain. Because we live in a culture where we can't survive if there's a little bit of discomfort. We've specialized in the art of avoidance. We do that in our relationships really well. Well, I don't like what you said. I'm unfriending you on Facebook. I'm going to block you so I never have to talk to you. And then we go down the street and we see them. Okay, there's a problem there. But when we see them, we cross to the other side of the street so we don't have to talk to them. Because we specialized in the art of avoidance. God sent Elijah back to some very difficult circumstances, the ones he had run away from. And not only was he to go back in the proximity of them, he was supposed to go back and face those problems, tackle the major issues head on. Some people will say, okay, I will go back, but don't ask me to talk to so-and-so. I might be in the same room with them, but I don't have to talk to them. And God said, no, you have to talk with them. You have to deal with the issue because the issue isn't going to go away until you let me deal with the issue. And that means you have to confront it head on. How many times have we made the choice, busy in life, maybe it was our work environment, maybe it was our school environment, and someone offended us, and so we tried to avoid them as long as possible. And then we ended up face to face with them, and we couldn't avoid them, but we turned around and pretended they weren't there. You may go, that sounds pretty silly, Pastor Rob. I've had that happen to me. I've had it happen to me where people were mad at me, but the rest of the family, they weren't mad at. So we met them in a store, and there was this great conversation between them, this person, and my wife and kids, and I'm standing right next to my wife, but they pretended I wasn't there. Didn't look at me, didn't acknowledge me, didn't speak to me. I'm going, this is kind of petty and childish. But we can't be in proximity. We have to deal with the issue head on. We need to stop this art of avoidance because it's not an art. It's self-deception. And we need to deal with what's going on. How many of us, and it's a natural response, think about it. How many of us will get a splinter in our foot or stub our toe, and so we avoid putting pressure on it. And we go around and we're walking all hobbled and, oh, wow, look at us. We're not trying to get people to look at us, but we're avoiding the pressure. Well, why don't you just stop, bend over, pull the thorn out of your foot? Well, I don't know. That's an awful lot of work. No, hobbling around like that for a week and a half is really retarded, and that's a lot of work. It might be a little bit painful. You might have an infection by now that you have to deal with, but deal with the issue, and then you can go on with life. The only way forward is by going back. And we forget this. We can't advance and be the people of God that He wants us to be without going back. And the rest of that sentence, the rest of that point is the only way forward is going back and confronting the sticking points. You can look all throughout the scriptures and you'll see examples of this over and over and over and over again. The people of God were wanting to go forward, and God said you can't go forward because you have to deal with the sticking point of the past. I think one of the biggest examples that we find in Scripture is when the people of Israel were called to go to the Promised Land. God had done miraculous things where the world knew how awesome God was by all the plagues that happened in Egypt. He confronted every major god that was in existence on the world, and He showed He had power and authority over them, and the people were set free, and they went to the edge of the Promised Land. And the 12 spies went in, and the 12 spies came out, and 10 of them said, they're giants. They're too big, they're too strong. Okay, the God who just proved He was all-powerful and is leading you into the Promised Land, at this point, have you forgot about Him? 2 of them, Caleb and Joshua, said, no, we can go in because God is with us. But the people listened to the 10. And so they had the sticking point, and God led them through the desert. They didn't wander. They weren't lost. God led them through the desert until a whole generation had died out that had disbelief. And then He brought them back to the exact same spot. And it says that when they were getting ready to go in the Promised Land, Joshua, who is now leading the people of Israel, sent spies into the land. And they went to the same places, saw the same people, and they came back and said, God has given them into our hands. And they had to cross that same spot. God brought them right back to the same spot where their faith had given out and said, now you have a chance to step up. Are you going to step up or are you going to step back? Are you going to advance into the promise that I have for you, or are you going to continue to live in a desert that is only a sign of death and defeat? And we have the same opportunity. We come to the same point, and we have to deal with this. We can't avoid it. We have to deal with it so we can step into the promise that God has for us. And when we step into that promise, it's stepping by faith, but we know we've dealt with the past, so we can step into it. We cannot step into the new season of life that God has for us if we don't clear up the unfinished business of the past. You can try, and you're going to take all that garbage with you, and it's going to cause the same issue in the new season of life. And you'll never step into the promise, but you'll step into the chapter going, wow, it looks great, but why am I not living it? Because you haven't dealt with the past. We need to deal with those issues so that we can step in. We can't step into that new season of life that God has for us if we don't clear up unfinished business. Because the unfinished business stops us from stepping in to the promise that's ahead of us. I discovered this in a very real way a couple years ago. Some of you might remember that a couple years ago, my dad said, I want to go on a nice vacation to Europe, and I want you to go with me, Rob. And I said, great, I'll try to get time off. And I got the time off, and so I was able to go, and he goes, make sure you have your passport. Well, I had a passport when I was a kid. I had a passport in my early 20s. My passport had expired. And when I found it and told my dad it expired, he goes, well, you better get on it now because it's taking a long time. Even if you pay the extra expedited stuff, it's taking a long time. We had a guy who was scheduled to go on a missions trip. 4 months in advance, he tried to get his passport expedited, and he couldn't go. And we had to eat the price of the ticket because he didn't have his passport. I couldn't step into the blessing of going on a trip with my father to Europe if I didn't deal with the unexpected challenge of the past, which was an expired passport. Not a big challenge, not a horrible challenge, just the details of getting it done. Well, I got busy with life, with ministry, with kids, with family, and I forgot to put in my passport. It's about 2 months before we're supposed to leave. My dad has a ticket, and he's paid a lot of money for me to go on this trip with him, and I'm like, I need to get my passport. I don't know. And so I fill out all the paperwork. I pay the extra money to expedite it, and I said, Dad, I'm just hoping. He goes, yeah, so am I, because it should have been done a long time ago. Unfinished business was preventing me from stepping into the blessing of time with my dad on this beautiful trip. Fortunately, the passport came in, I went, but I had to deal with the unfinished business. I couldn't pretend, oh, look, I have this old passport. Look at what I looked like when I was 22. Will that get me in? I don't look anything like I looked when I was 22. I had hair when I was 22. On my head, not hanging from my head, on my head, I had hair. So it wouldn't work. When we postpone disobedience because of discomfort, we're only postponing temporary pain, but we're increasing the problems. That's what I encountered with my passport. It was a hassle. I had to pay extra money, but I was increasing my problems and the potential of those problems by not dealing with it. We need to deal with that unfinished business so that we can move ahead and do the things that God wants us to do. Step into blessings that God has for us. But we have to deal with it. We have to clear up that unfinished business. Nothing, I want you to listen to this. Nothing can sabotage the power of the presence of God in an individual or in a group, a congregation, like the lingering, undealt with issues that we carry into it. I don't know how many people I've talked to who've walked into this church and said, well, I'm giving church another try. What do you mean another try? Well, this issue from back here, when I used to attend here, that stopped me from going to church. And have you dealt with that issue? No, but I'm going to give church another try. So you bring that issue into our church, and you're expecting this church to function well when you bring the issue in. Yeah. No. It's like bringing my van to a tire shop because I have flat tires. I barely made it in, and as I was sitting there talking to them, the tires go flat. 2 of them. And they walk out and say, well, you got big holes in your tires. That's okay. I don't want those holes patched. I just wanted to bring it to the tire shop because you guys have new tires. That would be stupid of me. To go to a place that can fix it, deal with the problem so I can roll out of there, able to get to where I want to go and do the things I need to do. But that's the way we are spiritually a lot. We go to the right place. The answer is there, but we go, no, I'm not going to bring that up. I'm not going to deal with that. I don't want to, it's too uncomfortable. And so we walk out the same way we walked in because we haven't dealt or we haven't let God deal with the issues. And sometimes he actually brings them up. I've had people go, man, I came to your church and it's like you were reading my journal. Why were you doing that? I'm not doing that. I'm just preaching God's word the way he did. If you heard that, God's talking to you about something you need to deal with. Well, that's really uncomfortable. it'll be so much better if you just deal with it. Because you're going to carry that uncomfort wherever you go. Because you haven't dealt with it. If we are serious about welcoming God and his plans, we have to have a passion for obedience and a clean slate as we walk into that obedience. If we are serious about welcoming God and his plans in our life, the promises he has for us, we have to have a passion for obedience that includes a clean slate. Because you can't walk into a new thing carrying all the garbage from the past. You have to deal with it. Are you willing to take that step? God wants to unblock our lives. He wants us to be able to walk not only into a new chapter, but to walk into it with all the potential and nothing hindering us from entering in that new chapter. But if we don't deal with what has been sticking, if we don't deal with the past, if we don't deal with the unfinished business, we will never enjoy what God has for us in the future. It won't happen. Some of you might remember your first crush. I remember when I was in Bible school, I thought I'd met the person I was going to marry. We spent a lot of time together. We hung out a lot. I started thinking serious long-term thoughts. She noticed I was thinking long-term thoughts. I wasn't talking a lot about them, but she noticed I was thinking more long-term. And she said, well, this is nice and it's fun, but I'm never going to get married. Like, then why have you been hanging out acting like you wanted to get married? Oh, I'm never going to get married. And then she went on to talk about all this stuff, and it actually came to a head when I did a stupid mistake. Well, not stupid, an ignorant mistake. Because I didn't know that there was something called flower etiquette. Have you guys ever heard of flower etiquette? It's where flowers and bouquets mean things. I thought flowers were just pretty things that you gave people you liked. So I'd give her a rose here, a rose there. Well, she went away for a Christmas break. And I thought, I'm going to surprise her. I'm going to have a bouquet delivered to her to surprise her. And I don't want it just to be a dozen red roses. That's kind of blah. So I want to be a dozen red roses and a white rose. I did not know that in flower etiquette, that is a proposal. I didn't know that. So I sent off this thing that I thought was nice. It was a dozen red roses with the white one right in the middle. And I didn't know I was proposing to her. Well, she knew flower etiquette. More importantly, her mom knew flower etiquette. And when this bouquet arrived, she had a long talk with her daughter. And then I got a phone call. A Dear John phone call, except my name's Rob. Dear Rob, I'm not interested in that kind of thing. Go away. I'm like, what on earth is going on? Now that hurt my little heart. Women were holding me accountable for things I knew nothing about. And if you're married, you know that happens. Okay. That's just part of life. I did not know it was part of life at that point. I was young and naive and hurt. Now, I could have carried that into every potential relationship from that point on. And I could have looked at every person going, they're going to judge me by stuff I don't even know exists, so there's no point of even trying. Women are evil. I could have had that attitude. And if that was the case, I wouldn't be celebrating that I became a father again, or a grandfather again today, because my eldest daughter gave birth. Because I would have never given my wife a chance. And she's the best thing that God's ever given me. But if I had been carrying that experience into it and never dealt with it, I would never step into the blessings that he had for me. We need to be willing to step in, and we need a passion for God and welcoming God and his plans. And so we're going to be obedient, and we're going to get rid of all that past stuff and say, God, I'm just here, and I'm going to say yes. I'll give one last story before we hit the last point about this whole idea. I wouldn't be your pastor today if I wasn't willing to get rid of past hurt. Because this is one of those sobering things about being a pastor. Pastors deal with people, and people are problems, and problem people hurt you. I was taught that in Bible school. But I was young and naive, and I didn't believe it. So I went out and pastored, and that was not a big deal until the second church I was pastoring, and then I got hurt by people in the church. And then they got a hold of people who were in authority over me and hurt me even more. So I couldn't trust people in churches, and I couldn't trust people in authority over me. That was my initial gut reaction. Well, if that's the case, I need to take my family, move to some place that's hundreds of miles away from civilization because people hurt you, and then we'll live a happy life by ourselves. And God said, no. You need to trust me, submit to me, and I'll take care of all of that. That event that hurt me like that, where I was driving down the road, yelling at the top of my lungs at God and punching the roof of my van as hard as I could, because I was upset and I was hurt. I was lashing out in a way that wouldn't hurt anyone else. That event happened 25 or so years ago. If I didn't let God deal with that, I wouldn't be standing here today. Because I wouldn't have trusted churches. I would have fit into that category of there's unfinished business that I haven't dealt with, so I'm not ever going back because they're all evil, and that's not true. We need to let God deal with that, because then we can move on to the third one, and we need to understand that renewal comes from going to those hard places and taking bold steps. Elijah had to go back to those hard places, but he couldn't run as fast as he could through the hard places. He had to take bold steps and deal with it. The queen hated him. Remember Jezebel? We talked about her. He not only had to go back to where she was still in control, he had to anoint someone who wasn't king to replace her husband, which means she was going to be taken out of power completely. He had to take bold steps. He anointed 2 people as kings over Israel, and then he anointed his successor because God said, there's still more, and you need to be involved in more, and that meant he had to avoid being comfortable. Comfortable with the old problems, so as to avoid the new solution that God had for him. You know, this is the one sad thing about human nature. We get stuck in a rut, and when we're there long enough, we start to be comfortable in that rut. Better the pain and the misery I know than the unknown of a future I don't know. So instead of changing, we stay in the same old patterns. We stay doing the same old things, and God says, you have life more abundant if you'll just get out of that rut. And we go, but I like my rut. I know my rut. It's 10 feet long, and it's about 3 feet wide, and I can go back and forth, and I know all the junk that's in my rut. And yeah, there might be thorns, and there might be stuff I step on, but I know it all. And that out there, that's unknown, and I don't like that. And God says, oh, do you trust me, or do you want to trust your rut? Your rut keeps you where you are. Trusting me sets you free. Being in your rut means you're going to be blocked. Elijah could have stayed in the cave for the rest of his life and he would have done nothing. But God says, I have so much more for you to do. You need to step out of the cave. You need to get out of the rut. You need to stop being comfortable where you are, and that's one of our big problems today. Lots of what we do is designed to make us comfortable. Now, I don't have a problem with comfort. We have climate control in the building. It keeps us comfortable. We have comfortable chairs that you sit on. I remember the first churches I went to were either on the dirt outside or on wood. Not wooden benches, just wood. A plank set up on some stumps, and that's what we sat on. Not comfortable. But we made everything so comfortable, so when something uncomfortable challenges us, we go, oh, that can't be God. No, discomfort, a little bit of pain is what it takes for us to grow, for us to step into what God has for us, the promise that he has, but we have to deal with it. Many people continue year after year knowing that they need to change, knowing what they need to do to change, but they're so comfortable in their old routine that they refuse to do what is necessary. We live in a culture in our world today where we are one of the most out of shape societies in the world. And we all know it. But we don't want to change our habits. I like my latte, my mocha that I get twice a day, every day, regardless of rain or shine or snow or sleet or hail. I'm going to go get that coffee. It's not just coffee, it's sugar with a little coffee flavoring. And we wonder why our wallets are thinner and our waistline is bigger. But we don't want to change because it's comfortable. And working out is hard. Yeah, that's why it's called work. You have to work, and if you do it outside, it's even harder, but you lose more weight. So we don't like it, so we don't change. We need to be willing to do the tough things and let God deal with it so that we can move beyond. We will never move beyond our blockage, even if God opens up the way, if we're too comfortable where we are, so we just stay. I'll say that again. We will never move beyond the blockage, even if God moves out of our way, if we're too comfortable, so we just stay where we are. God has so much potential, so much promise, so much living for us to do. We need to be willing to say, God, I'll face the unfinished business. I'll do the uncomfortable thing. I'll walk in obedience so that I can be who you designed me to be. I want you to think about that as you take a moment to bow your heads, because we're going to celebrate communion in a moment.